Look at today. So today's webinar is all around using technology and in the context of specifically some examples around making music with young people with autism, not necessarily young, they could be older. So I'd like to get stuck in. I think break the webinar down into three kind of sections. I'd like to start by talking a bit general and kind of more theoretical side of things, sort of pedagogy about music and more particularly musicality and around ideas around context of musical play and development. And then I like to share three examples from work we've done in the past and look at how technology has helped in those instances and look at how these different things come into play, and then just actually explore a few different examples of what's going on with that. So if that's okay with everyone, I will press on with that. So yeah, so musicality, play, music. I'm not sure what everyone's background is. My background is I'm a developmental psychologist and a musician. I worked quite closely in the field of human communicative musicality with people like Professor Tratan. And really what we're talking about here is a broader view of music as a behavior that people share together, something that we do with other people. And it's not necessarily about, playing a piece of Bartok or covering a Katy Perry song or being able to hold a straight beat. It's about what music does, and all that how really in musicality supports how we develop and how we develop our skills to communicate with other human beings. It's multisensory. And that's really where it gains a lot of its power in education and in terms of supporting development in different ways. It's a joy. It's fun. It should always be fun. And so there's references we can send out in this sense, but I think, and my previous webinars, what I'm really talking about in terms of supporting initially is this idea of assisted musical play. So music as play, music as something playful and engaging. And in the context of autism, it becomes particularly apparent in that I think where you engage in kind of musical play and activity, where you're engaging with that is it's taking place against a backdrop of maybe less engagement going on in the context of where you're starting. So you have a kind of, sometimes people talk about the magic of music in these contexts and how it might be so very special. It really is. It's such a core part of all human behavior that sometimes when it's seen in a context where there's less maybe communication going on or less direct interpersonal communication going on and contact, then it can seem to really provide this jump. But music, engaging in musical play, playing with sound especially. So, when we start as babies and infants, we many of us start playing with our voices, and if we can hear that and hear the interaction. And as adults, we support that playing with sound. And this is a particularly important in the context of supporting with young people with autism, because I think that there's really kind of three areas that I want to look at here. And one is exploring and playing sound, and really what technology is giving individuals control. And this actually reflects and sort of supports our own notions around stimming and being able to kind of control your environment and be in control of that. And for a lot of young people with autism, giving them control of sound is the first step. They may not be verbal, and therefore they may not be familiar with controlling their own sound on their own, and sometimes that is an issue. Whereas with certain technologies, we can give the young person control of sound and exploring sound. Then there's exploring and just playing with sound as a sensory experience, but it's deeper than that, and that actually really is where the kind of creativity we'd like to look at different ways that we can facilitate play, and that's playing with others, but also playing with existing music and existing resources. There's lots of ways of doing that. We can have a look at Chordify as a website, or Garageband, and a few other things around that. And if anyone has any questions as we're going, this is less of a presentation and hopefully more of a discussion as well. So if anyone has any questions, please do fire those in, and I'll be able to see those in the panel. And then I would like to spend a little bit of time on the idea of supporting, sort of more creating your own. So what particular kind of starting points of technology are great for enabling students, or young people who are really engaged in music making and are finding a positive strand there, and how we can support them further. So let's go back to this where we're starting, which is music as play, as a multi-sensory, playful. I think I think we can think of music in that sense, particularly in early years, as a safe space to play, and that's what we can use technologies to do and to support and to kind of engage with, is to provide this kind of almost like a soft play area. So particularly, rhythm and simple recurring rhythmical structure can be really engaging in those in autism, because it creates a predictable format, a predictable space where you know where you are, you know what's coming, and that helps you process the sensory stimulus and helps you ground yourself, as it were. The idea of stimming and grounding and predictability, and so loops in that sense are great, and actually there's a huge amount of resources in that area. So I'd like to start off, if we're taking this, we're thinking initially more about music as shared activity in sound, and I think as well it's important an open mind in this respect. And other things are important is letting other people play, and not necessarily going with your own preconceived or cultural notions of what music or what musical sounds should be, and allowing people to explore the world of sound in their own way. Let them lead. Now, a quick note on more traditional instruments. They're beautiful. I play some myself, but in the context of children with special needs, and particularly, say, certain groups who may have autism, traditional instruments can be fragile and delicate, which can make them less usable in a way. If they're sensitive to being chucked and thrown around, then that may not be the best place. Some of the stringed instruments really have very fine, high tensile wire on them. The style of interaction, the physical interaction, can be quite dangerous, and some are just heavy, and if they get thrown like a tuba or something like that and hit someone, then you've got issues. So I think the biggest one as well is that they require high levels of skill and often knowledge to be able to actually just create the sounds. So we can use different bits of technology to give people a foothold, a start in exploring sound. And I think just before I show you some of that, then the example that I'd like to share is from some of the research work back a few years ago, when David and I were working in schools and the research work for Skoog. This is going back to, say, 10 or 12 years ago. So we would often be working with autism units and specialist units, and often with really with non-verbal young people, and it was very much a process of exploration and improvisation. And the thing that was really individuals in the session making and playing with these sounds, you could feel the communicative bond, and it was very much in the moment. And that's something that I think is unique to how these kind of sound interactions can work, and can be incredibly positive in the context of supporting individuals with special needs. The interesting thing with it is that we would often be maybe with 2 or 3 students. We'd have a bunch of tech and some Skoogs, whatever, and we'd be making these sounds. And it was all about freedom, so giving them freedom to explore sound in a really kind of, in whatever way they wanted to lead that, which may not always sound that musical. And often, interesting was, you would see teachers going past the room that we were in, and they would walk past, and you could see as they went past, they would be like, "Whoa, what is that sound?" And not in a positive way, because there'd be this crazy sounds coming from this room. But it was crazy enough to teach stop them, and they would stop for it and listen. And then once they'd stayed and actually listened to the interaction and the exchange in terms of what was going on between the students and between us and the students, then they would stay for ages, and they would get it. And instead of it sounding like a random tuneless nonsense, which in some ways maybe it was, what they were hearing and seeing was the interaction. So I think if you can, by whatever means, give someone control of a sound, and ideally in a kind of constructive way, in a safe way, and we'll talk about how that can be done with technology in a moment, then that's the starting point. So enabling them access to this world of sound. So when we started off there, I was using my phone, and I had a which Rolly Seaboard 5D. Well, I will send out links to all these things after we're done. And so it's actually an app that can have another physical controller to it. But what I've done here is I've gone into settings, and I've reduced the keyboard down to just 13 keys, and I just touch the screen. And I can do that in a variety of ways, and it has this lovely interaction, this multi-touch interaction, and that you can just play around with in different ways. But one thing that's really important here, so you can see you've got all these settings around the edge here. What I would strongly recommend, and here's a good tip for using any of this kind of technology on smart device, well, in iOS actually, because this particular feature of iOS is, let's talk very quickly about guided access in this context. So for those of you that don't know, guided access is a feature of iOS that allows you to focus how a student or someone interacts with a particular app. So if you go into accessibility, this will be slightly flipped on your screen, but I'm going to show you anyway. And then in here, in the accessibility settings under general, you go down the bottom, there's one that says guided access. Now, if you turn that on, you have to set a passcode. And essentially, if you turn on the accessibility shortcut, that means that when I'm in an app, I'm going to use Skoog Scratch as an example, I think. There it is here, because it's got simple interface. So this is the interface on screen. Now, if I want the students just to focus on this part to interact with, if I triple click the home button, 1, 2, 3, I get my accessibility shortcuts up, go guided access, and then that allows me to draw on the screen. Here I've drawn this ellipse around the bit I want them to focus on. And when I put that in and say start, I can only touch, oh, well, I've blocked off, I've done it the other way around. I've blocked off the bit I don't want to touch. So we'll do 3 here, and we'll 1, 2, 3. Oh, I need to do my passcode. So move that up, and I'm going to make it so that I can't touch the menu like that. Okay. So then let's resume. And so now I can touch bits I want to touch, and we'll come back to that, but I can't access the menu feature. So that is just a really great way of setting up. So something like Rolly there, Rolly Seaboard 5D, you could have it set up so that you can't change the menus, and you're focusing the user on really just the sound creation part. So yeah, so that was one of those. So I think other things to try here. So again, there's something like Skoog here, which is this device, which is a tactile device. It's Bluetooth, so let's just turn it on. Let's connect in here. We'll go here, and we'll pair him with that. There we go. And this just provides a really point for the interaction. So it's this tactile touch point. And that kind of leads me on to a second point. But the reason that this is something like Skoog is good, or I'm going to show you something else in Garageband in a minute, is good, is that this presents a limited scale. So we have the tones that are all kind of making sense. The pentatonic scale has loads of presets for that. And what that does is it creates, when we first started talking about this this safe environment. So if you create a tone space where you'd have freedom within that, we can go crazy with this, but it's all going to kind of fit together and actually allows someone else to step in and start sharing that. And I think one of the important things when using technology is to try and make it with if there's, it's great for it to be on its own, creation on its own and playing with sound, but you really want to draw out that interaction side of it. And with a lot of these things, it's something that you can both, you and a student, or you and a sibling, or you and a child can use it in a way. You can do it together. You can share and explore those things together. Okay, so using technology that has some built-in, I suppose, not restrictions is the word, but what would I? It's providing enough choice to be creative, but limiting in a way that makes it this idea of a safe space, or a safe acoustic space. So that's good. We'll come back to some more things with that in a moment. A quick tip in Garageband, okay, in terms of exploring sound. So this is standard Garageband kind of. And what you can do here is there's a scale button. And in that, we can turn on, say, we'll do minor, we'll do a pentatonic. So there we go. And this then gives me a scale that actually tones are related, and it creates, as opposed to it being chromatic, it puts it into a kind of landscape, so that promotes exploration, but it gives it, again, this gives us a context, gives us a safe space to play. We've got some stuff in Squitch as an app, we can do that as well. But I think, it's so, there are lots of free synth and various apps out there that really it's just worth exploring. But the key thing is to enable that exploration of sound as just playing with the objects and the device. And it doesn't have to be making a tune. It doesn't have to be repeating a song. What you want to do is promote exploring and having fun with sounds. Now, that leads on to, let's say, a second story in all of this, which is sometimes people's approach to sound may be very different. And what we may think of as traditionally as like a very musical sound, very engaging sound, others will not. Now, this leads me on to an example story from a case study, some work done years ago at Centre Scotland, and musician practitioner was engaging a group of young adults in music making, and he had various bits of technology, and there was a group of 4 or 5, and there was one young chap who he could not come engage with the technology. So sometimes people are often drawn to smart devices or screens, and that's great, and we can use those things like guided access to focus the interaction and get those sounds and play with them. But sometimes it's difficult, to get particularly some non-verbal students to interact with the technology. Now, referring back to the idea of looking at stimming and grounding, this particular young chap he would come to these sessions at the start, and he would focus on like the door handle actually, and he would spend ages playing with that door handle, and it was the sound that he was enjoying. And so this community musician, he noticed this and he took advantage of that. So he recorded the sound of the handle, and then he put it on, it happened to be a Skoog, but it could be anything, and then gave the young person that sound to play with. So if you're engaging with young people and there are particular environmental sounds that they enjoy, they repeat, that they are drawn to, now these may be a way in, a gateway. You can use them via technology, a gateway to drawing them into a kind of musical interaction exchange. Quick note on that: the basis of this kind of communicative play is really imitation and elaboration. So you don't have to be a Juilliard school educated improviser to kind of engage in this. You can really be anyone, and all you want to focus on is imitating and elaborating. So engaging with someone and creating sound, and then you repeating that sound back, and then just adding to it a little bit, or changing its timing, its focus, just playing with it a bit, but making sure you're recognizing that. But let's have a look at this idea of using, in terms of exploring sound, Seaboard, there are there's Airbox. Skoog has its own built-in synths. Play around with those. Give freedom to explore that sound, whether it's through headphones or through amplification. Really try and take pleasure in that kind of world of acoustic stimulation. Take a bath in it, let people dwell in it. And on that front, I suppose actually another important thing on the technology side is something as simple as a microphone with an amplifier can be incredibly powerful in facilitating playing with sound, either through vocalization or again through environmental sounds. When you amplify a sound, it becomes something more, something other. It gives it a certain power. If you can, often a little amp that you can find might have some effects or some reverb you can turn up on it. Give that room to play. An important caveat on that with amplified sound is obviously be aware, be sensitive to sensory overload, and give the young person with autism control over how that environment builds and how the volumes, give them some control on that, allow them to set that level. But coming back to these environmental sounds, so this he recorded the sound of this door handle, and then he was able to present it in a way that the participant could then actually play with. And so we actually developed this app, Scratch, to do exactly that. So I'm just going to clear this. So this is a so this actually, I don't know if you can hear that. And actually it works with the Skoog as well. I'm just going to mute the Skoog app for just a second. There's loads of help on how to use them. I'm focusing more on the sort of application side of things. I'm going to turn the volume on that down. Give me a second here. So in Scratch, there it is. So we've got I've got Garageband on as well. You can mix these things up, totally fine. But so this, Skoog in reference to these kind of communities, this tactile, physical touch point actually can be incredibly powerful. It's very engaging. Done a lot of work through the years of that, but it's actually just the physicality of it and being able to have it as something you share between you and someone else as a user is really powerful. So let's have a look at the idea of using environmental sounds. So I'm just going to clear the buffers, and I can do something like taking a tape, and we can do a sound like this. There we go. So now I've got and it allows you to play around with that sound. So taking something as, let's do a crumply one now. So now we've got and the neat thing with this app as well is if we go into let's go into the settings for a particular sound like this one, we can actually put the kind of scratching aside on it. It should be good. So now we can. So I don't know if you can see, I'm squeezing here. Look. Now this, I'm aware this may not sound that musical, but I'll tell you now, it's a lot of fun. The fact that you're physically in control of sound, and that's this idea, and you're in control of your environment then, and you're creating a situation where you're grounding and to a degree stimming in a way where it's very safe, and I'm in charge. So when I'm touching it, that's what's controlling it. And again, it's giving this idea of playing with sound. So you can do that with traditional instrumental sounds through an app like Garageband or Rolly Seaboard. You can use something like Skoog for synth sounds, or you can use something like Scratch and sampling to really take environmental sounds and elevate them and lift them and play with them. And obviously you can use voice with this as well, because it just uses the mic on board, and that again is very powerful. We spoke briefly there about using amplification in that sense as well, which I think is really important. So that was that one example. Where are my other examples that I was going to talk about? So 3 examples, and then so So I've talked about the example of kind of looking at playing with sounds, giving freedom of exploration. It doesn't have to be musical, but really push the boundaries. Let people make a glorious noise. It doesn't have to result in something that can be performed at a bandstand. It should be something that is shared in the moment, and that's where I think the initial power of this is. But we grow and we learn, and then when engaging and playing with sound, remember, it doesn't have to be musical sounds. It can be recorded sounds, and something like Scratch or even a voice memo app where you can go out and you can take environmental sounds and use them in this way. And I've actually seen a couple of therapists or spoken about using sounds where they've taken sounds that are perhaps traditionally problematic for an individual, and by controlled way, allowing all of that bell, sample, or siren, or something that maybe it's a loud car or a dog bark or something that maybe can be disruptive for them traditionally. Giving them control can help desensitize and make that more dealable with, in that sense, in terms of OT. So that's a nice side benefit. So explore sound, play with sound, try different apps. I mean, I would strongly suggest GarageBand as a starting point. Here's a cool thing in GarageBand. If you don't know this already, let's just show you this quickly. In one of the more recent updates in GarageBand, let's get here. Let's go here. So if we go to carousel, if you're all familiar with this carousel for choosing instruments, the latest version has something called the Alchemy Synth, right? So this is quite unique. This is an amazing kind of sounds that you get from it, right? But what's nice, again, so remember, and then we can choose an actual sort of minor. Well, let's do don't know, try Southeast Asian. Let's try that. So now, so here, the thing with this, as opposed to it being keystrokes on the piano, again, we could use guided access to block this off, but I can just slide around in there. And have fun with it, okay? So where I'm going to move to now is the sort of second part about supporting playing with. So by that I mean playing with existing music or existing musicians, taking this a bit further from, okay, so we've been exploring sound. So how can we take something like this, in terms of playing with that, and really apply it to playing with sound? And the share with you in terms of use cases. Sam Rudham, who's a singer-songwriter, great singer-songwriter, and she has autism. And actually, music has very much been her passion. I met Sam a while ago now, 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, at a trade show. And there's a video on our YouTube channel of Sam playing Don't Stop Believing by Journey. And I was at this trade show, and Sam's mum came up to me and said, would it be okay if Sam had a go with Skoog? And so that's what I was there for. I was like, that's great, that's fine. That's cool. And she said, well, what songs have you got that Sam could play along with? And we had the notes for Don't Stop Believing to hand. So I assigned and it. We put the song on and she just played it there and then. And one of the things that came through from that was this: when you can provide a forum for someone to really play with music they love, how amazing, how engaging that is. So I'm going to share some tips on how to do that just a moment. We'll send out the link to Sam, and literally, and I hand on heart, so we were at this show, and the next day she came in. It was next week, actually. She'd never played Skoog other than that one time at the show. And then, so we got her to come into the office and do a little video. And that's the video that's on YouTube. And that really is her playing Skoog for the second time. And she's just, it's the joy of playing with the song that is so uplifting and really amazing. So different ways you can do that. With Skoog, which is this little fella here, this facilitates this type of play really easily, because we have the automatic iTunes or Spotify. You can choose a song and it will automatically tune it to the song. Let's raise that up a bit. But we'll not go into that too much because we don't want to get too much copyright kind of issues. Violent Femmes, great tune, added up. But so Skoog is really set up to facilitate this type of playing with improvisation. If you don't have Skoog, there's other ways that you can do that. One way you can do it is in Garageband, okay? A combination of Garageband and Chordify or just Google, right? So if I go to my iTunes here and I want to play with maybe Work It Out by Beyonce. I don't know if you know this track, it's a pretty good track. This one, yeah, recognize this? So, that tune, some of our best work. The thing we need to do to facilitate playing with, all you need to do is find out what the kind of the tuning, what the key of the track is, the sort of root key, and then there's various things you can do, like with Skoog or with GarageBand or other technologies, where if you can set the sound exploration device that we've explored before to the right key, then you can facilitate playing with in a really creative way. So if I go online now, and actually on our website, we've got in support, if you go to the Skoog songbook here, not the songbook in the app, but online, we've got a bunch of tracks here where if we go to Beyonce, Work It Out, it says G minor for the scale. So that tells me if I can find a way of setting things to G minor, I'll be able to play with that track, okay? Let's put it to the test. And if I go to GarageBand and on my synth here, right, I want something a bit more powerful. It's got analog. Yeah, that's cool. And then in that the scale button that's on there, it says a button that says scale on it. We're going to go minor because it was G minor, wasn't it? And then up here, key signature. In the settings there, you can set the key signature. So if I've set it to G minor, and now I have this set here. So I should, in theory, if I put Beyonce back on, I might have to turn up GarageBand a little bit. Let's put Beyonce on, and let's get a bit more juice on this. I think it's turned itself down. Okay, so now. Okay, so that's doing it with GarageBand. With Skoog, all we have to do is set the notes to G minor. So it's on minor, let's do G, and now. So it's just about finding the root key. Now, a really neat thing you can do is there is a website called, where is it? Well, let's yeah, Chordify. Oh, Chordify, we'll send that out in the resources. Allows you to take songs from Facebook and it will tell you what the chord progression is and what the root key is. That's a great one. Another really good one is eChords. Or sometimes you can just Google what key is Maroon 5's Moves Like Jagger in, and take that from the web, and then you set the settings in Skoog, or you set settings in GarageBand, or you set the settings in whatever kind of app you're using to that. Or you could tune, the technology doesn't have to be limited just to this type of technology, although this does give you a particular advantage of, it can be robust, it can be fixed, it's designed for that kind of use. You can, as long as you can hit that kind of key formation, then you facilitate with, and that really takes the engagement to another level. So moving from exploring sound to playing with is really can be really powerful, and it really enables that kind of build, to build on in much the same way as we move from babbling and exploring and vocalizing as young infants into then really engaging in more kind of formal interaction and proto conversations, as they're called, with our caregivers and parents. These are all musically based, and this is another way in through using amazing synth sounds and kind of crazy things like that. So just very quickly, I think worth noting for some people that there's another app that I think is important to mention, which I hope is on here. I'm going to be in trouble if it's not. Oh, there we go. So Bloom. If you haven't heard of Bloom, again, that's something we'll send out a link to in the Bloom. But Bloom is a generative music app. I'm going to go into create mode, and it is touchscreen based. And again, it provides a lovely, safe environment to explore these sounds. It's touchscreen. It will repeat itself back to you, but and it will change it slightly. Sometimes it's the idea of imitation and elaboration, really, and it will evolve. Now you can play with Bloom, and this provides, and actually, it's sensorily wise, it's a really lovely, structured environment. Everything is tuned appropriately. We also have worksheets that are available online for Skoog, so you can tune the Skoog to the right mood in Bloom, and then you create that more dynamic setup. And you can also use that worksheet to use Garageband alongside maybe keyboards and those kind of things. Remember, play for it. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention. I'm going to now switch over slightly, and I want to talk about moving. So we've looked at this, really supporting exploring sound. Started to look at playing with, and now I think one thing that to finish on here is the idea of creating your own. Now, actually, the use of samples and the use of environmental sounds to create some kind of instrumentation with an app like Scratch or Keezy, for example, if you want to just focus on touchscreen interaction, can be incredibly powerful in terms of creating your own sounds. And that again is, like I said, we talked at the beginning about giving control and really giving the young person control of their environment and the sounds that they're making, which is really important, a very powerful thing to do. So I think also in terms of creating your own tracks and music, I think there are so many different ways of doing that. You can simply record performances. So Scratch as an app has an ability to record the interaction and you can play that back. Recording and playing back, so recording reviews, again, in terms of grounding and stimming, these are really quite engaging behaviors in that kind of environment. But I think one of the best apps, in my view, for this, you can use different devices, but really GarageBand is really so. Remember, it's free on iOS, and it's such a great resource. And what I think is really amazing here is thinking about live loops. Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with live loops. Let's have a quick look. So live loops is, I want to see if I've got my particular track in here. Live loops is let's do hip hop starters. So it gives you this grid pattern where you can touch a block and it starts playing a loop. Now you can start with your own blank slate and actually create those yourselves. And I would strongly advise, if you're interested in this taking it further. So if you're engaged in using certain technologies to explore sound, create those sounds, create that interaction, then moving on to this kind of level of starting to create patterns and loops. Now, this is a great app this is a great facet of GarageBand to play with just on its own. So you can just fire off a couple. Yeah, all kinds of stuff you can do with it, just touching, playing, exploring. Again, a great activity for someone to do on their own. But I think starting from scratch is a really great one. There's something from blank and suggest going to our website and downloading. There's a bunch of free iBooks on getting started with GarageBand that help that. But it really is very simple. You can go to Write and you can start to add this stuff in. You can down here at the bottom, you just go to the add part. You can add a instrument, and then we can go something like our synth. And then you double tap the block and you can play in either through the keyboard or through Skoog or through other interface you've got attached and create that block of sound that then you can have control over and manipulate. So, I mean, the other way you can use GarageBand in terms of that is really just as a more traditional, let's go back here. Let's take off the grid view, there we go. We just go for a more traditional kind of tracks approach where it's more like a sequencer, and you can, here's an example there. That's why it's going to have to download. Was it downloaded? Yeah, so where you have tracks that are laid out and they're recorded longitudinally. And again, actually, that's a really great tool to use when you're in the exploring sound phase, where if in the background you record these. I'm just going to look at the time, 1741. There we go. You can record it longitudinally, one for review yourself, but also to enable people engaged in session to go back and play with it themselves. So there's playing with sound in a dynamic way, in terms of playing with Skoog or playing with GarageBand, or playing with something like some kind of synth on a phone. Where we might be. And then there's the idea of in the background, if you're using an iOS device, then you could have GarageBand running in the background, recording all of that output for you to then play with remotely, and that takes you more into this idea of creating your own compositions. And it doesn't have to be, you don't necessarily need the knowledge of music to do that. You can do that just by recording this and then playing around, moving different bits around relative to each other, dragging them on the screen and seeing how they fit. And again, that rolling it back to what we were talking about at the beginning about a freedom of expression around that. Don't get caught up on whether it has to be, verse, chorus, middle eight song. It can just be a bunch of sounds that are put together, but if they're put together by you or by whoever you're sharing this time with, then it has meaning in how you share that. So I haven't had any questions pop up here. I hope that you've found this interesting. We've got lots of other webinars and stuff on YouTube. We are always available for help and support and answering questions. We're going to be doing some more Facebook kind of live bits and pieces going forward in the next kind of few weeks. And yeah, do check out, we'll follow up with some links and some further support. If you want to learn more about Skoog, just email us. We're going to be doing a Getting to Grips with Skoog webinar, which will be much more focused. There'll be a live screen view going through the different apps, showing you how that works. But yeah, I think the key things here, technology such as this can really help support kind of musical play by providing access to a world of sound that isn't possible perhaps ordinarily. So using these multidimensional synths like Roly or things in GarageBand or Skoog, and playing with that it opens the door. And really, it's the open season, and you can draw it down so many different ways. But what you really want to do is to create some context of a safe space to play with those sounds. So you can either do that tonally, or you can do that, rhythmically and structurally. Have fun with it, and don't be afraid to try it yourself. So you can always get us at skoogmusic.com or email us at info@skoogmusic. Thank you for joining us. I think we're almost up. I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, just get in touch with any questions. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye.